Have you ever felt overwhelmed by the things around you? Not just the clutter on the shelves, but the quiet, invisible weight that gathers in the corners of your mind. The sense that no matter how much you organize, something still feels unsettled, as if you're always one step behind your own life. It happens slowly, a drawer that barely closes, a closet holding versions of you that no longer exist, a home filled with objects that once made sense, until they didn't. Yet we keep them, hoping they might one day complete a feeling we can't quite name. I used to live inside that quiet pressure too, a room that looked fine at first glance, but carried a heaviness I couldn't explain. The Japanese have a way of seeing this, a belief that our surroundings are mirrors of our inner state. When life becomes crowded, the mind follows. And when space opens, something inside us begins to soften. Today, we're going to explore a way of living from Japan that has brought clarity to millions of people around the world, reducing your belongings to just 100 meaningful items. It may sound extreme at first, almost impossible. But stay with me. Underneath the number lies something gentle, something deeply human. This isn't about deprivation, it's about release, creating room for attention, for calm, for yourself. What you're about to hear isn't a challenge or a rulebook. It's an invitation, a way of looking at your belongings and your life with a little more honesty and a little more compassion. By the end of this video, you may begin to see how owning less can make space for something more essential. Let's take this slow step together. The path begins here. Step 1. Understand the SMART counting rule. The morning light rests on the edge of the table, soft and steady. I place a small notebook down, then another, realizing I've been moving these same objects from corner to corner without deciding why they're still here. Nothing heavy, nothing chaotic. Just a quiet sense that each item is asking for a bit more attention than I have. That's usually the moment when the counting rule begins to make sense. Not as a challenge, but as a way of seeing. Before anyone starts the 100 items journey, there's always the same temptation. You look around the room and imagine tallying everything, every sock, every receipt, every pen that still writes. It feels impossible before you even begin. But the Japanese approach was never designed for rigid accounting. It was meant to restore clarity through gentleness, by grouping things the way we already live with them. I first noticed this when I opened the drawer where I kept my socks. I thought there were maybe 10, there were 26, but when I looked at them not as 26 individual pieces, but as the socks I used to move through my week, something softened. It became one unit, one small ecosystem with the same purpose. Suddenly, the drawer didn't feel crowded anymore. It felt honest. Sometimes clarity comes not from reducing, but from gathering what belongs together. That's the quiet wisdom of grouped counting. It mirrors the rhythm of daily life. Underwear becomes one category, everyday accessories another. The cable attached to a phone is simply part of that phone. Each group reflects a function, not a number. And when you count by function, you begin to see your habits more clearly, how naturally you reach for certain things, how rarely you touch others. The pattern appeared again when I pulled out shirts I hadn't worn in months, maybe years. When I stopped forcing myself to classify them one by one and instead asked, what role does clothing play in my life right now? The answer rose softly on its own. Most of those shirts didn't belong to the present version of me. They were holding space for someone I used to be. Understanding that felt less like a decision and more like noticing a truth that had been waiting. Some things, of course, don't need to be counted at all. A bottle of soap you'll replace next month, toothpaste, a shared sofa, the bed that supports everyone in the home. These exist in the background of life, steady, necessary, and constant. They don't define your personal relationship with possessions. Drawing that boundary early keeps the process from becoming rigid. Minimalism works only when it feels humane. I felt this again while sorting cables. I had a handful, some old, some unused. But the one I always reached for stayed in my hand without hesitation. The rest felt like small, unfinished decisions, each carrying a faint, maybe someday. When I counted them as a group instead of as individuals, something loosened. Use reveals necessity. Time reveals truth. There's a quiet saying in Japan. What remains effortlessly is what was meant to stay. The counting rule simply helps you notice what those things are. Later that evening, I opened a blank spreadsheet, not to chase a number, but to map the outline of my belongings. Clothes, tools, accessories, all placed into gentle clusters. Seeing them grouped felt like looking at my life from a little distance. Simple, clear, a little vulnerable in its honesty. And somewhere in that clarity, the room felt lighter. Not because anything had been discarded yet, but because I finally understood what I was carrying. The next step wasn't about reducing, it was about paying attention, one category at a time, letting the real picture appear slowly, like breath settling into a quiet room. Step 2. Follow the Konmari method. The table is still clear from earlier, just a notebook and a folded cloth resting on the surface. The room feels a little quieter, as if something has settled after that first round of grouping. I walk past the closet and pause with my hand on the door, not to clean yet, but to listen. There's a faint heaviness behind it, the kind that comes from years of adding without asking whether the things still belong. That's usually when the Konmari method begins to drift into mind, not as a system, but as a way of returning to yourself. Marie Kondo's approach often appears gentle on the outside, but it carries a depth that people only understand when they try it. She doesn't begin with the closet or the drawers. She begins with a picture, an image of the life you want to inhabit. I remember sitting once in a quiet corner of the room, imagining a morning where everything felt lighter. Not perfect, not spotless, just aligned. That image wasn't lofty at all. It was simple enough for the body to recognize. And somehow, that small vision made decisions softer. When the heart knows where it's going, the hands follow without resistance. I picked up an old jacket I hadn't worn in years. The fabric was still good, but something felt distant. I set it down, not out of guilt, but with a small nod to the time it had walked with me. Marie's idea of thanking an item can seem strange, yet in that moment, it felt natural. It wasn't a ritual, it was acknowledgement, a quiet way of saying, "You served me once," and that was enough. Letting go became less about losing something, and more about freeing it from a role it no longer needed to play. There's a Japanese thought that says, an object completes its purpose when you no longer reach for it. I didn't understand it fully until that afternoon. Real gratitude doesn't cling, it releases. The real shift happened when I gathered all my clothes into one place. Not just the shirts in the closet, but the forgotten ones in a storage box, the ones buried behind winter coats, the ones folded neatly yet rarely touched. Seeing everything at once was humbling. A quiet truth rose without effort. I owned far more than I lived with. And for the first time, the volume spoke louder than any rule or advice. You can't pretend scarcity when the pile in front of you tells a different story. Sorting by category, not by room, changes the mind in a way you don't expect. The focus moves from space to self. From, how do I tidy this corner? To, what do I actually use? It's a shift from managing a home to understanding a life. And in that understanding, you start to sense which things carry you forward and which ones simply wait in silence. Konmari's order, from clothing to books to papers to the random objects and finally to the sentimental pieces, has its own rhythm. Starting with the simple builds a kind of clarity muscle. By the time you reach the letters, the photographs, the objects tied to memory, the mind has already learned how to choose with steadiness instead of fear. You don't force yourself to be brave. You become quietly ready. The heart of her method lies in a question that seems small. Does this spark joy? But joy here isn't excitement. It's not the thrill of something new. It is subtler, more like the warmth of a familiar morning, or the sense of ease when something fits naturally into your day. When an item carries that feeling, your body knows before your thoughts do, and when it doesn't, the silence around it becomes clear. I held a shirt once and felt nothing at all. No dislike, no attachment, just absence. That absence told me more than any checklist could. Sometimes neutrality is the sign that an object has already completed its role. Sometimes lightness begins with noticing what no longer speaks. As the afternoon light shifts across the floor, the closet door remains open, clothes gathered where I can see them. There's no pressure to finish, only an invitation to move at the pace of awareness. The Konmari method isn't about getting rid of things. It's about finally hearing which ones still support the life you are trying to live. And from here, the process begins to unfold on its own, like a slow exhale guiding you toward the next quiet step. Step 3. Stop bringing new items in. The closet door closes softly behind me, and the room settles again. There's a calm that comes after letting things go, a kind of spaciousness you feel more in the body than in the space itself. But that calm can disappear quickly if new things keep slipping into your life without intention. I learned this in a quiet, almost embarrassing way, by noticing how often I clicked add to cart while telling myself I was pursuing simplicity. It was Fumio Sasaki's story that pulled me back into awareness. He had pared down his belongings to around 150 items, but the real transformation happened earlier, when he stopped bringing unnecessary things home. His change didn't begin in the closet, it began in the moment he paused before buying anything at all. I remember one evening standing in a store with a small kitchen gadget in my hand, something I was sure would make life easier. It felt useful in theory, but when I imagined using it every day, the feeling faded. What stayed was the weight of owning it, of maintaining one more thing. I set it back on the shelf, and the air around me felt lighter. There's a quiet truth here. What you remove matters far less than what you stop adding. Sasaki's way of buying only what feels like a clear yes began to shape how I moved through stores, both physical and digital. That sense of clarity is not dramatic. It's more like the body leaning slightly forward when something belongs, or relaxing subtly when it doesn't. When I started listening to these signals, decisions became easier. Anything that required convincing myself to buy was no longer a match. I began to trust the silence more than the desire. One sentence often came back to me: if it's not a clear yes, it's a clear no. The simplicity of it feels almost stern, yet there's kindness in choosing only what you genuinely want to care for. I also noticed the difference between buying cheap and buying right. There were objects I had replaced again and again, things that saved money in the moment but cost time and attention later. One day, I held a well-made item in my hand and realized it asked nothing from me except to be used. No frustration, no repairs, no quick decline. That quiet reliability brought its own kind of joy. It wasn't excitement, it was ease. High quality isn't about luxury. It's about reducing friction for years to come. Sasaki speaks about seeing every purchase as a kind of rental. I tried this once with a new backpack. I imagined paying for it each month. The idea felt oddly clarifying. The backpack suddenly became less about the price tag and more about the responsibility it carried. Would I be willing to keep investing in it? The answer told me everything I needed. I walked away without hesitation. The freedom of not buying something can feel as grounding as the clarity of keeping what you love. There was also the matter of gifts and free things, objects that enter quietly and stay longer than we expect. I used to accept them all, thinking it was polite, but many of them ended up tucked into drawers, creating a small, persistent friction. One day, I let myself simply say no. Not harshly, just honestly. And a surprising sense of dignity followed. No can be a form of respect for your space and for the person offering. Over time, I began practicing small rituals, pausing for a day before online purchases, walking away from something in a store to see if I would return, trimming promotional emails until my inbox felt breathable again. None of it felt like discipline. It felt like removing noise from the edges of my life. In Japanese thought, there's a belief that the things you allow into your home should feel like quiet companions, not decorations, not trophies, just objects that support the life you want to live. As the evening settles in, I look around the room and sense fewer tugging threads, fewer things calling for attention that hasn't been given. The space feels steady, almost like it's breathing with me instead of against me, and it becomes clearer that reducing to 100 items isn't just about letting go. It's about choosing, with a bit more care, what enters next. From here, the journey naturally turns toward the objects that remain and how they begin to shape the rhythm of the days ahead. Step 4. Convert physical items to digital. The evening settles gently across the room, and the quiet feels different now. After changing the way I bought things, the shelves seemed a little less dense, the drawers a little easier to close, but there was still a certain weight that didn't belong. A weight made not of objects, but of paper, discs, old photos, and the quiet guilt of, I'll organize these someday. I reached for a stack of documents that had followed me through every apartment I'd lived in, their edges softened by time, their purpose mostly forgotten. It struck me how much of my life was held in things I rarely touched. That's when the idea of shifting from physical to digital began to take shape, not as a project, but as a gentle possibility. I picked up an old book I had once loved. The spine felt familiar, but the story inside had already become part of me. Keeping it now felt less like honoring it and more like carrying its shadow. I placed it down, opened my e-reader, and realized the words were still there, clear and weightless. It wasn't the book I needed. It was the meaning it once gave me. Sometimes what we hold onto is not the object, but the memory of who we were when we used it. The same quiet truth revealed itself with CDs and DVDs. Boxes of them had lived under my bed for years, carefully stacked, rarely opened. Most of the music I loved was already streaming whenever I wanted it. The movies too. The physical discs had become reminders of a time when owning meant access. Now, access lived in a place without shape or dust. Letting them go didn't remove anything from my life. It allowed the present to take its rightful place. Then there were the photos, hundreds of them, tucked into envelopes from the different decades. I remember holding one, a picture from a vacation long past. The moment was sweet, but the paper carried more weight than the memory. So I scanned it, watched it appear on the screen, clean and bright. For the first time, the memory felt closer than the object. The box of photos no longer felt like a shrine. It felt like a doorway I could finally step through. There is a simple thought in Japanese living. Memory lives in the heart, not on the shelf. I understood it more deeply with each photo that turned into light. Paper was the final frontier. Old invoices, documents, fragments of plans I no longer followed. They were never heavy individually, but together they created a quiet pressure in the corners of drawers. I spent an afternoon with a small scanner, letting each sheet pass through. The whir of the machine became a kind of meditation. When the last document slid out, thin and empty, I realized the room felt brighter, not visually, but emotionally. There were fewer unresolved pieces asking to be sorted someday. Digital storage has its own discipline, of course. Files want homes, just like objects. So, I gave them homes. Folders, labels, backups resting quietly in the cloud and on an external drive. Knowing they were safe made the physical versions easier to release. Safety, I learned, is not about holding tighter. It's about knowing where things truly belong. What surprised me most was how the room changed without changing at all. The bookshelf still stood in its place, the drawers were still closed, but the air felt different, lighter, less crowded, with the silent stories of items I no longer used. Even the way I moved through the space shifted, as if there were fewer invisible threads tugging at my attention. In the end, transitioning from physical to digital wasn't about technology. It was about clarity, letting the present breathe without the shadow of old paper and plastic. The things I converted still exist, just in a form that doesn't ask to be dusted, stored, or carried from place to place. As night deepens, the screen of my laptop reflects a folder labeled Memories, each file neatly arranged. The physical boxes that once held those moments are gone, but the moments themselves feel more accessible than ever. And this shift, quiet as it is, opens the path toward the next step, choosing what remains in the physical world with a little more care and allowing the home to feel less like storage and more like a place to simply live. Step 5. Remove duplicates and choose multi-use items. The night air has settled and the room feels clearer than it did a few weeks ago. With fewer papers stacked in corners and memories now resting gently in the cloud, the edges of the home finally feel breathable. Yet, when I slide open a kitchen drawer, a quiet truth returns. Simplicity isn't only about letting go of the past. Sometimes it's about noticing how much we've multiplied the present. I pick up a small whisk, one I rarely use. Beneath it lies another and another. Farther back, a citrus press still wrapped in plastic. Each object makes sense on its own, but together they form a chorus of duplicates, each whispering the same promise of usefulness. I place the whisk down and feel a subtle shift inside. It's a familiar realization. I don't need all these versions to live one simple day. In Japanese minimalism, there's a quiet belief that excess hides in repetition. We don't notice it because the objects feel harmless, small, even practical. But repetition carries its own weight. The weight of storage, of choice, of mental noise. As I sort through the drawer, I notice how my hand always reaches for the same few tools, while the others wait patiently for a moment that never comes. The truth is soft but undeniable. The tools we use reveal the tools we need. I move to the shelves next. Bowls stacked higher than I remember. Plates collected over the years, each slightly different, though I gravitate toward only one or two. Holding them, I can feel how similar they are. Variations of the same idea, multiplied by habit more than intention. Letting go doesn't feel like losing anything. It feels like returning to clarity. One bowl that suits the morning rice, the same bowl that holds a simple soup in the evening, a single object that quietly adapts to the shape of the day. There is a small saying I've heard: a tool earns its place by how easily you reach for it. Objects don't ask to stay. We're the ones who keep them long after their purpose has passed. Finding multi-use items became its own kind of quiet joy. A soft cotton cloth that dries dishes, doubles as a table mat, and wraps fruit on days I walk to the market. A single bottle of oil that works for cooking, for dressing, and for a bit of shine on a wooden cutting board. Even the kitchen knife, sharp, simple, faithful, takes the place of 3 or 4 specialized blades I once thought I needed. The fewer tools I kept, the more capable each one felt. And something else happened too. With fewer items, I began caring for them differently. The knife was sharpened more regularly. The bowl was washed with a bit more presence. Objects respond to attention. The fewer they are, the deeper the relationship becomes. I return to the drawer with the extra utensils and pause. Not to decide, but to observe. Most of these things were purchased with good intentions. Hosting dinners, trying new recipes, imagining a version of myself I rarely met in real life. Letting them go feels like telling the truth about how I actually live. Not the fantasy kitchen, not the someday lifestyle, just the real ordinary rhythm that has quietly shaped my days. A small moment comes when I look at a single item, a fork I use for nearly everything. Stirring eggs, mixing batter, serving rice. Its usefulness is almost invisible because it's so natural. That's when it becomes clear. Versatility doesn't shout. It blends seamlessly into life. As I gather the duplicates into a box, the drawer closes with a lightness I hadn't felt before. The space looks calm, but more importantly, it feels honest. Each object left behind has earned its place, not through sentiment, not through cost, but through presence. The room holds its quiet again, the kind that arrives when things finally match the way you move through the world. And from here, the journey becomes less about counting and more about noticing how the right few objects can do the work of many, and how simplicity often emerges not from scarcity, but from clarity. The next step unfolds gently, understanding what remains essential for the long term, and what simply lingers because no one has asked it to leave. Step 6. Apply the 5-year rule. The house feels lighter now. Drawers open without resistance, and shelves no longer carry the weight of forgotten duplicates. But in the corner of the room, there's still a small box I haven't touched. I sit down beside it as the afternoon light softens, and for a moment, I just breathe. These are the things that never fit neatly into any category. Objects tied not to utility, but to old versions of myself. Inside is a dress I once loved. The fabric still holds its shape, even though I haven't worn it in years. I hold it up against the fading light and notice how it no longer reflects the life I lead. It doesn't feel wrong. It doesn't feel right. It simply feels like a memory that hasn't been spoken to in a long time. And that's where the quiet strength of the 5-year rule begins to settle in. An invitation to look beyond nostalgia and into the truth of how we live now. I place the dress on my lap and ask the question softly, almost under my breath. Would I need this in the next 5 years? The body answers faster than the mind. A stillness, a small exhale, a sense of distance. Letting the dress go doesn't erase the moment it belonged to. It simply acknowledges that the moment has already passed. Some objects carry the weight of who we hope to be. Others carry the weight of guilt. I reach for an old book next, one I always told myself I'd reread someday. When I open it, the pages feel familiar, but the desire is absent. The 5-year question drifts through again, gentle but firm. The truth rises before the thought. This book has already given me what it came to give. There is a Japanese belief that the future should not carry the burden of maybe. I understand that more each time an object returns silence instead of intention. The rule becomes clearer as I sort through the box. An old hiking backpack, unused for years, still faintly smells of cedar and rain. I smile at the memory, but the life I live now moves differently. Keeping it would be holding on to a version of myself that exists more in imagination than in rhythm. I set it aside with gratitude, knowing that if the mountains call again, I can choose a new companion when the time comes. Then there are the sentimental things, the pieces that make the hands pause. A set of delicate dishes from my mother, beautiful but untouched. I run my fingers along the rim and feel both love and reluctance. The 5-year rule doesn't ask me to be cold. It asks me to be honest. Will I use this? Do I love it enough to carry it forward? The answer is soft, but clear. I choose to keep a single piece, a small spoon that feels warm in the hand, and let the rest continue their story elsewhere. Not everything belongs to the 5-year filter. Some things are anchors, documents, seasonal tools, rare essentials. These stay without question. But for the objects that live in that uncertain space between once and maybe, the rule gives shape to the truth we already know, but often avoid. I take a notebook and begin to make a small list. Not a spreadsheet, not a project, just a quiet inventory of the items I'm unsure about. Writing the last time I used each one brings a surprising clarity. Seeing 3 years, 5 years, I don't remember on paper, makes the decisions feel less emotional and more aligned with the life I'm actually living. Clarity grows when we give it a place to stand. By the time the sun dips behind the window frame, the box beside me is nearly empty. What remains are the pieces that still belong to my present, pieces that still rise with a gentle yes. Everything else carries its own quiet goodbye. The room doesn't look dramatically different, but something inside it has shifted. An honesty, a lightness, a sense that the next chapter has a bit more room to unfold. And from here, the path opens to the final step, where fewer belongings make space not only for simplicity, but for intention. Step 7. Create a monthly let-go bag. The room is quieter now. The corners no longer hold hidden weight, and the box from earlier sits empty beside me. As I stand up, a gentle steadiness follows, a sense that the home is beginning to match the pace of my life. But clarity, I've learned, isn't something you arrive at once. It's something you return to, again and again, like sweeping the floor or airing out a futon on a sunny morning. The simplicity stays only when you keep meeting it. I reach for a cloth bag hanging near the entryway. It's nothing special, just a soft canvas tote, but over time it has become a small part of my monthly rhythm. The Japanese call this spirit kaizen, continuous unhurried improvement. Not the kind that pushes, but the kind that whispers. The bag opens easily, its emptiness almost inviting, as if waiting for the next handful of things ready to move on. I walk through the home slowly. No checklist, no pressure, just noticing. A scarf I no longer wear rests on the back of a chair. A small gadget in a drawer hasn't been touched for months. These discoveries don't feel discouraging anymore. They feel like the natural settling of life, objects completing their roles, then stepping aside. I place them gently into the bag and continue. The movement is soft, almost meditative, a quiet conversation between myself and the space I live in. Dropping something into the bag does not feel like parting. It feels like alignment. At the end of each month, I sit for a moment with 3 simple containers, one for letting go, one for passing on, and one for recycling. Their meaning is more important than their form. They help me see clearly that not everything needs the same ending. Some things still carry value and can be given to someone who will use them. Some have lived their full life and deserve to be released. Others simply need to return to raw material. Sorting them becomes a way of honoring the stories they held. There's a small, steady comfort in noticing how much lighter life becomes when decisions are made in small steps, not dramatic waves. A few minutes each month replaces the exhausting cycles of everything at once. The home gradually becomes a place that maintains itself, as if clarity has learned to stay. Once, I wrote a single line in my notebook after a month of clearing. 7 items out, none missed. Reading it now, the words feel like a soft truth. Most of what leaves was never supporting me in the first place. Some habits keep the balance steady. When something new enters the home, I pause for a breath. If one thing comes in, one thing goes out. It's not a rule I force. It's a quiet exchange that keeps the space honest. Before buying something, I imagine what object it will replace. If nothing comes to mind, the desire usually fades into the background. Simplicity grows when the door for new things narrows. A few months into this rhythm, I began noticing small changes I hadn't expected. Cleaning became faster. Choosing what to wear took less time. Even my thoughts felt less scattered. With fewer things demanding attention, more of my mind was left untouched, free to rest or wander or focus on what actually matters. Minimalism, I realized, isn't about living with less. It's about living with what stays meaningful over time. As the third month of this rhythm comes to an end, I sit quietly at the table and look around. The room isn't perfect, and it doesn't need to be. What matters is that it feels like a space I can meet fully, without apology, without overwhelm. The air moves easily, my shoulders drop a little. Life feels steady in a way that doesn't call for fanfare. And as I close my notebook, noting this month's small releases, the path ahead opens naturally. Understanding why this work matters, not in numbers, but in the kind of freedom it makes possible. Now that you've walked through these 7 steps, it becomes easier to see what this journey was truly about. It was never the number. It was never about proving you could live with less or stripping your life down to something rigid. It was about freedom, the kind that grows quietly when your home, your mind, and your days finally have room to breathe. There's a freedom that comes from a space you can reset in half an hour, a home without forgotten boxes tucked in corners, a life where objects no longer pull at your attention. There's a freedom in spending less because you buy with intention, in letting old things go so they can serve someone else, in no longer paying the silent cost of what you keep but never use. And maybe the deepest freedom is the one inside, the freedom of no longer carrying the weight of what you don't love, the freedom of knowing what matters because you've gently removed what doesn't, the freedom of time that isn't swallowed by cleaning, maintaining, searching, or managing, time that returns to you, quietly, steadily. Marie Kondo once said the purpose of tidying is happiness. Fumio Sasaki said that when you reduce your belongings, your life begins to change. They're both right, but you don't have to believe them. You only need to try. Choose one category, clothes, books, anything simple, and try the grouped counting method. Notice how you feel when clarity begins to appear. If this video helped you in any way, consider sharing it with someone who might be struggling with clutter or overwhelm. And if you'd like more slow, intentional guidance on minimalism and mindful living, you're welcome to like and subscribe. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Which category will you start with? Thank you for being here, and I'll see you next week. Sometimes freedom begins with letting one small thing go.